we're standing on holy ground. For the Lord is present, and where he is holy.
Don't shut up.
Good morning, everyone. I think it's on. Before we get into our message today, I just wanted to read a quick message that Pastor Matt Haberman wanted me to share with our congregation here after the camp dinner. He said, "Dear brothers and sisters, I was honored to be asked to speak at our recent camp fellowship meeting there at Berean Church. What a great meal and time of sharing and good old-timey music. Thank you for the kind love gift you blessed me with. May the Lord continue to do great things in Ipava." So he asked me to share that with you guys. Diving into this week's message, though, we are in the third week of our series, Ruin to Redemption, going through the book of Ruth. And so let's dive in. To be honest with you guys, I'm not always the most patient person when it comes to food or specifically making food. If there's a way to microwave something, I'm generally going to do that. Couple examples. Macaroni and cheese. Most people cook that on the stove. I cook it in the microwave. Ramen noodles, again, supposed to be on the stove. I cook them in the microwave. Pizza rolls, chicken nuggets, used to cook in the microwave, now use the air fryer I got when I moved in to my house in November. Supposed to be cooked in the oven, I'm pretty sure. I don't like waiting for the oven. I use the microwave as much as I can. And that way I am with food is kind of how we as a society and people are with most things now. We're kind of this microwave type of culture, if you will. We want everything fast and want fast results. But the thing is that God's timing doesn't work like a microwave. As we're going to talk about today, it's oftentimes more like a stove or even a slow cooker or a crock pot. You can tell I'm hungry when I was writing this, by the way. And what he prepares for us and what he prepares for our lives take time, but those results are much richer and deeper that way and better for our lives than anything we could do in our own quick timing. And in the same way that if I cooked my macaroni and cheese boxes on the stove, it might taste better than it does in the microwave. But that's besides the point. We're covering Ruth chapter 3 today, and as we're going to talk about, we're going to see that truth, that God's results, while they take longer, are worth waiting for and worth waiting on and following his timing. So before we dive... it's not wanting to stay up on its little stand. There we go. Before we dive into today's chapter, let's recap what happened last week in chapter 2. And so chapter 2, it picked up with Ruth and Naomi. They were living in Bethlehem after they had traveled there from Moab, because Moab was in a famine in chapter 1. And having nothing but each other, Ruth, with Naomi's encouragement, went out to glean and gather in the fields and just pick up leftover grain that the harvesters missed. And when the owner of the field she was gathering in, this man named Boaz, saw her and heard how Ruth had stood by Naomi through everything and took care of her, he took favor on her and showed her kindness and showed God's heart to her and really took care of her and let her gather grain, not only leftover grain in his fields, but told the harvesters to leave behind stocks for her and gave her food and water and shelter, and told her to keep coming back to his field and not to go to anyone else's fields. And so that leads us into chapter 3, which is what we're covering today. So now, as we start chapter 3, the harvest season is becoming to come to a close, and Naomi knew the opportunity for Ruth's future would not last forever. So one evening, she pulled Ruth aside and shared this plan with her that she had. And she said to Ruth, "Wash, put on your best clothes, anoint yourself with perfume, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known until Boaz has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he rests. Go, uncover his feet, and lie down. He will tell you what to do." And I can imagine Ruth's heart must have been racing 1,000 questions at this point. But her reply was simple. She said to Naomi, "I will go. I will do whatever you say." And that night, after Boaz had worked hard at the threshing floor, celebrated with food and with drink, and laid down by this pile of grain to go to sleep, Ruth quietly, through the shadows, she comes in, she uncovers his feet, and she laid down, and as the silence of night kind of wraps around her a little bit. And Ruth said to him, "It is I, Ruth." And with boldness, she added, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." And we'll get into that term a little bit later. But this was more than a request for marriage. It was a request for protection and redemption, and for the continuation of Naomi's family line. But there's a complication here. Though Boaz's heart was clearly moved, there was another man that was a closer relative and had claimed to be this kinsman redeemer first. And the law at the time demanded that he be given the first opportunity, kind of like he had dibs, if you will. So the outcome with Ruth and Boaz was not yet certain. Despite that uncertainty, Boaz spoke with kindness, though, and reassurance, and he praised Ruth and called her a woman of noble character, and promised that he would see the matter through, even saying, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. But if the nearer kinsman refuses, I will redeem you." He didn't send her home empty-handed either. Before dawn, Boaz filled Ruth's shawl with 6 measures of barley, which was a huge sign of his good faith and good intentions, and sent her back to Naomi under the cover of darkness to protect her reputation. And when Ruth returned, Naomi listened carefully. Then, with the calm wisdom of one who trusted God's providence and had faith in it, she told Ruth, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what will happen. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And that's where our chapter ends this week. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. We don't know what's going to happen until we get to chapter 4. But there's a lot to unpack with that story this week. And our bottom line that this kind of is all going to revolve around is we need to follow God's timing. Follow God's timing. And there's a lot that could mean. But the first thing is that we need to step out in faith. Step out in faith. God will open and close so many doors throughout our lifetime. But when he opens a door for us and gives us an opportunity, we need to walk through that door. Even when it's scary, and it will be scary sometimes, we need to step through those doors in faith and take that leap of faith. And that also means we need to be paying attention and looking for when he opens those doors, and looking for those doors to open so that we don't miss those opportunities. In our chapter, we see Naomi advise Ruth to go approach Boaz on the threshing floor. And Naomi advised Ruth to take action and to be bold and make a risky choice. I mean, what if something went wrong? What if Boaz didn't want to take her under his wing and be that redeemer and all those things we talked about? What if he didn't receive it well? But still, Naomi advised Ruth to do that and to take a bold step. And the other side of that is that Ruth chose action over passivity. Instead of being passive and thinking about all that could go wrong and staying in the routine she was in, she took bold action. This is an example we can learn from. A lot of times we get comfortable and we get into these routines in life, but we don't want to change that. But sometimes we need to step out of those routines and step out of our comfort zones in order to take a step in faith. God's timing often will include moments where we need to act courageously instead of waiting idly by. And that won't be easy. It might come in a season where you're comfortable and life is going great and you feel secure. And maybe that bold step will make you a bit uncomfortable or cause you to feel a bit less secure or less financially stable, whatever that may be. But remember two things when that step is scary like that. Number one, God sees the whole picture, and he's always working for our good. And number two, we weren't promised life with Jesus would be easy. In fact, it's the opposite. We knew coming in that this walk with him would be hard, and we knew it would require us to make sacrifices. So it's easier said than done, but we need to be prepared to make those sacrifices and be willing to do that. We talked a bit about this last week, but there's a lot of times when people hear faith and they think of belief, and they equate those as the same thing. That having faith in something means believing in it. And while belief is a big part of faith, they aren't exactly equal. They aren't the same thing, because faith also requires action. And if we truly have faith in God and have faith in his providence, it means we need to take action and make a move when he clears a path for us or opens a door. There's this Christian movie that came out when I was a kid about this high school football coaching team that I like called Facing the Giants. And there's a scene in the movie where the coach is telling his team this story about two farmers who desperately needed rain, much like we have until this week. I don't remember the last time it rained before this week, but imagine how our area was. His fields are dusty and dry, and both of them prayed for rain. Okay. Both of them prayed for rain, but only one of them fully believed the rain was coming and went out and prepared his fields for it and plowed and planted the seed and got everything ready, fully believing that rain was coming. And the coach asked his team, which one of these farmers had more faith? And the answer is obvious. The one who prepared his field for rain is the one who had more faith. He didn't just pray for the rain and ask for it. He was bold, and he took steps of action on that belief. Then he believed God would provide the rain that was needed. Sometimes for us, our faith will look like getting ready for rain before we see it, before the rain actually comes. And sometimes it'll look like moving forward when God opens a door, even though we don't know how it's all going to work out, even if walking through that door is scary or feels unstable. Be careful not to confuse waiting on God with doing nothing, though. Even if there's not a clear path right now, we still need to be working and preparing for when he opens a door, though, and preparing for when rain comes. Like we've said before, our faith needs to be active. We need to have that faith and belief that he will open a door and that he will bring rain. And even if he hasn't done it yet, knowing he will. And going back to that illustration, we need to make sure we're preparing for that rain to come, not just hoping it does. Stepping out in faith will be hard sometimes. There will be times that we can't do it on our own strength. We can't do it on our own willpower. And that doesn't mean we just don't take that step. That's when we need to pray to God and ask him to encourage us and ask him to help us take those steps. There's this popular saying that I've heard so many times in my life, that God won't give you something that's more than you can handle. And that's not quite exactly true. He'll give us stuff that's more than we can handle on our own, because that's when we need to learn to lean on him and depend on him and ask him for help. And that teaches us to depend on him and lean on his strength. We also need to be willing to make risks and to sacrifice comfort and security like we talked about when God's plan requires it. We talked about how sometimes we'll have opportunities to take a leap of faith or step through a door that we don't have the faith or don't have the strength or the willpower to walk through on our own. And the reason some of these choices will be hard is because sometimes following God's plan and stepping out in faith requires sacrifice. Maybe it's you're not as stable financially as you were before this, or you just don't feel as secure in your footing, whatever that may be. But we need to learn to be willing to do that anyway and be willing to make sacrifices and step out of our comfort zone. And that won't be easy. And honestly, there will be times when it's really hard. But I'm reminded of something my friend Keenan, who's a really close friend of mine and a huge mentor for me in both life and ministry, said to me one time in a season of life I was going through, and that's that growth isn't supposed to be comfortable. growth isn't supposed to be comfortable. And ever since he told me that, that's something I repeat to myself a lot when I'm in these seasons, when I'm feeling like this. Is that, yeah, following God, having faith, walking through these doors will bring discomfort sometimes. But in that, God is growing us, and he's using that to grow us in him. Ruth recognized that God's plan would unfold as she walked in trust. She took a step of faith. She took a step of faith in going to Boaz on the threshing floor and asking him to take her under his wing and be her family redeemer, having no idea how he would react. And I don't know about you guys, before reading this, I had not heard that term, family redeemer, kinsman redeemer. So I did a bit of research before, as I was writing this. And to add context, what that means is back in this time, a family redeemer, a kinsman redeemer, was a male relative who had the legal and cultural responsibility to rescue or restore a family member or property that was in dire need. And so that's a huge responsibility. That's what Ruth is asking Boaz to do for her. And of course, we can't know for sure, but I can imagine she was at least a little nervous to take that step, especially not knowing how he would react. I know I would be, at least. But she trusted God and trusted his plan and took that step of faith in a way that required faith and required trust. And we should look to Ruth as an example of walking forward with trust in the Lord's plan. The second thing we're talking about today is that we need to trust God's process. Trust God's process. We mentioned how Ruth acted without knowing how Boaz would respond. Well, it turns out Boaz responded with kindness and said that he would take her under her wing as her family redeemer. But he also points out that there's another kinsman who has that first right if he wanted, that he had the right of first refusal. The solution to this question, this issue at hand, wasn't instant. It wasn't microwave, to go back to our intro. And a lot of times with God, our answers won't come instantly. They won't come fast. But we have to wait for God to resolve a situation and answer a prayer. And I want to emphasize something. We talked about taking a step of faith and acting and having faith that acts and walking through open doors. But being active doesn't mean rushing things and taking into our own hands and trying to follow our own solutions. And we have to learn to be able to wait on God's timing and trust that process even when the outcome doesn't come immediately. God's timing will often include a process that we can't bypass and we can't rush. And we need to learn and be able to trust that process and learn to be patient with it, instead of taking things into our own hands and trying to solve the problem instantly and trying to find a resolution right now. A big part of faith is trusting that God is orchestrating the details that we can't see. Like we said earlier today even, God sees the big picture in a way that we don't. And honestly, that's a good thing. It's easy to believe when you can see everything laid out and see where things are going. But when we can't see where things are going, when we can't see the big picture, that forces us to learn to have faith and learn to have trust in him and learn that his plan is working and working for our good in a way that even when we can't see it, we know it's still there. It's important to remember that just because God makes you wait for something doesn't mean he's ignoring you, doesn't mean he's abandoning you. He will never abandon you, actually, and he'll never ignore you. Oftentimes, waiting is simply a part of the plan. Just because something doesn't come overnight doesn't mean God isn't still with you. One thing that living in St. Louis and living in North County has taught me to be familiar with is road construction, and having driven through Peoria a few times, I'm guessing you guys are familiar with road construction also. It's great, right? Not really. No, I don't like it. But it's actually pretty annoying. And sometimes when a road is under construction, you can still drive by, but traffic slows way down or comes to a stop because it moves down to one lane, much like the bridge over the Illinois River over in Beardstown right now. They've been working on that for what feels like forever. And you have to sit at this temporary stoplight to go over the bridge because only one lane of the bridge works. Sometimes a road is just closed down completely and you have to go through a detour. And detours are also annoying and they're inconvenient. But the detours and the road construction are necessary to make the roads better and keep them safe and smooth. And waiting on road construction and that whole process to end is hard and annoying and probably feels like it'll never end with some roads. But in the end, we're better off because we're driving on a much safer, smoother, well-kept road. Waiting on God is like that. It'll be hard sometimes and will be annoying and we'll feel like we're waiting to cross over that bridge forever that only has one lane operational. But we'll be so much better off waiting on God's plan and His process than if we take over and pursue our own solutions. Remember that even when we are active in our faith, results won't come right away sometimes. Don't get discouraged by that. It's easy to get down. It's easy to get frustrated by having to wait for who knows how long. When you find yourself in those times feeling that way, spend time in Scripture, spend time in prayer, asking God to give you peace and settle your mind. And like we said, just because He's asking you to wait doesn't mean He's not there. Doesn't mean He's not still working. He's always right there, right alongside you, going things with you. And this is admittedly a lot easier said than done, to learn to trust God and trust His hand in the unseen details in our lives. And then trust Him in every single situation. And it will require building up that trust. That won't come overnight. And in the same way that if we want to be in good physical shape, we need to exercise and train our body and so on. If we want to build attributes like trust and patience, we need to train our body. Ask God to build trust in us. Spend time in Scripture reading about trust. We can't expect ourselves to just magically have that level of trust overnight. We need to put in effort and train ourselves for that. We also need to be patient when answers are delayed. Remember, His timing is always right and perfect. Like with trust, though, we can't just expect to gain patience overnight. We need to train ourselves and build it and put effort into it. And I'm reminded of a story back before I got this job, when I was going through months of job searching and interviews. A friend of mine who shares an office with my mom asked me how that was going, and my line I tended to say during job searching to sound positive it was, well, it's teaching me patience. And he said, he jokingly said, yeah, be careful asking God for patience. And I said, I didn't. It just happened. Sometimes God will decide that we need patience before we do. And He'll throw tough seasons at us that teach us to wait and teach us to be patient, but we'll be better off because of that. Be patient when answers are delayed. His timing is always right. And we can't just expect to get this trust, this patience overnight. We need to put effort into it. I want to stress that. But we can also change our mindset. It's easy to see time waiting as wasted time. But I want to challenge you guys as well as myself to change that thinking and be intentional and choose to see waiting as an opportunity, as preparation time, not wasted time. Choose to see that waiting time as time you can spend in prayers. Going back to our illustration from the last point, spend time in the fields preparing for the rain, of course. And spend time preparing for when God does bring that answer. Our third thing we're talking about is that we need to rest in God's promises. Rest in God's promises. At the end of the chapter, once everything has happened and Ruth has taken her bold step and Boaz has responded the way he did, kindly, Boaz sent Ruth home, and Ruth told Naomi what all had happened. And we see in verse 18 that Naomi told Ruth to basically sit still and wait for the matter to be resolved. And even says Boaz won't rest unless he resolves this today. We can and should rest assured in the knowledge that God has made promises to us, and He won't ever go back on those, and He won't abandon us. It may not and probably won't come immediately. It won't come with that microwave type of timing that we like. But we can rest assured knowing He is still working behind the scenes and still standing true by every promise he made us, and will never break any of those. We've talked about taking bold steps, and we've talked about learning to make difficult leaps of faith. And we've talked about learning to trust God's process and his timing and to wait faithfully. But rest isn't inactivity. It's a declaration of trust even. When we rest in him and when we rest in his promises, it's like we're announcing that we trust him and we know he will take care of us, so we don't have to take it into our hands. We don't have to pursue our own solutions. That we can rest and know he made a promise that he'll take care of us and that that's what he's doing. A lot of times it may seem like God is silent and like he's not moving in our lives. But remember, what looks like silence is often him doing what we talked about earlier. And it's him working behind the scenes and working in the unseen details and going through that process that we talked about. Sometimes on a flight, the flight will be coming in for a landing and you think it's going to land. And soon the pilot announces that you've been asked to enter a holding pattern, which is basically just flying loops above the runway. Because something happened or something's down on the runway. And that may feel like nothing is happening, that you're just flying around in circles because you can't see the control tower. You can't see the traffic down on the runway. But the people who are in that tower, they see the whole picture of the airport. They see what's happening. And what looks like a frustrating delay is actually the controller working in his tower to keep everything up and keep everyone safe and keep every landing secure. Sometimes God will put us in a holding pattern, just as he did with Ruth. We can't see why the delay's happening. We don't know what all's going on. But he sees the big picture, and resting in his timing and resting in his promises and trusting that he's working in ways that we can't see, lining everything up for a safe and perfect landing. Rest doesn't mean giving up and doing nothing. It means surrendering control to God and letting him take the wheel. It means letting him lead and letting him make the decisions instead of feeling the need to do that ourselves. There will be times when waiting and resting are hard and our human nature will want to kick in and will want to take over. But we have to resist that urge to take over like that. And we have to resist the urge to manipulate and force certain outcomes that we want to see. And that will be hard. That's our human nature that we're having to resist and put down. But to truly let God take control and truly rest in him, we can't give in to that human nature to want to take over. We can't give in to want to make certain outcomes happen. We need to trust that God will lead us to the right outcome. So anchor your peace and anchor yourselves in the truth that God is invested in us and in our outcome. He's invested in us even more than we are in ourselves. We are his children and his creation. And he's going to take care of us. He's going to look out for us and fulfill those promises he made us. And we can rest secure and peaceful, reminding ourselves of that. Reminding ourselves that we are in, even when we're in hard seasons, even when we're feeling beaten down, or even when that human nature is wanting to jump in, we need to resist it and we need to rest in him and learn to be patient. We also need to practice spiritual rest, like waiting, like trust, and like patience. Resting in God requires practice and effort. While you wait for God, while you're working in life, spend time every day in worship and in prayer and in the Word. Trust while you're waiting on him and use that time to focus intentionally on strengthening your relationship with him, growing closer with him on that personal, everyday level. But at the end of the day, we need to follow God's timing. That's huge. In our chapter today, Ruth had to step out in faith. She had to wait on the process and wait for results. And eventually we see on her faith and we see her rest while God is at work behind the scenes, figuring out the solution to the problem. And nothing about God's timing in this chapter was instant, but everything about it was perfect because it was his plan. Maybe you're currently in a season where God has opened a door, and if that's you, step through that door. You won't regret it. Maybe you're in the middle of that process, and if that's you, keep trusting and keep waiting faithfully. Keep building that trust and patience we talked about. Or maybe you're even in that holding pattern, flying in circles above the runway, and if that's you, remember, God's plan is still acting, and resting or being in a holding pattern doesn't mean nothing's happening. You can rest assured in His promises and give Him control. Wherever you are in life, though, remember God's timing is never late. It's never too early. It's always just perfect. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for giving us your Son, for everything you do for us, for giving us life and the breath we breathe. And thank you for giving us Ruth and Naomi and Boaz in this awesome book and story we're studying through. And I pray that we take what we talked about today and that you help us learn this week and that you guide us each of our steps. Amen.